I never thought my career would end this way. One minute, I was Joseph Williams, a respected doctor with a promising future, and the next, I was being escorted out of the hospital with nothing but a cardboard box of my belongings. The accusation had come out of nowhere. Allegations of negligence in a case where I knew I had done everything by the book. But the board was adamant, and there was no room for my defense. The feeling of injustice burned within me as I walked home that evening, wondering how I would explain this to my family. It all started a week ago when Mrs. Thompson, a longtime patient of mine, came in with severe abdominal pain. I ordered the necessary tests and prescribed the appropriate treatment. Despite my efforts, her condition worsened, and she was transferred to the ICU. Days later, she passed away. It was a tragic outcome, but I had done everything I could. Or so I thought. 2 days after Mrs. Thompson's death, I was called into a meeting with the hospital board. As I entered the room, I saw the stern faces of my colleagues and the cold, impassive stare of the hospital's legal advisor, Mr. Jennings. My heart sank. This was not a routine meeting. "Dr. Williams, please have a seat," Mr. Jennings said, gesturing to the chair at the end of the long conference table. I sat down, trying to steady my nerves. "What's this about?" I asked, looking around at the familiar faces that suddenly seemed so distant. Mr. Jennings cleared his throat and glanced at the papers in front of him. "We've conducted a review of Mrs. Thompson's case and found several areas where your actions did not meet the hospital's standards." I felt a surge of anger and confusion. I followed protocol. I did everything I could to save her. Dr. Reynolds, the head of the board, leaned forward. "Joseph, we have evidence that suggests otherwise. There were delays in ordering tests, and the treatment plan you prescribed was not aggressive enough given her symptoms." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. "That's not true." I ordered the tests as soon as I saw her, and the treatment was based on her medical history and current condition. If there were any delays, they weren't on my part. Mr. Jennings interjected, his tone icy. "Nevertheless, the board has decided that your actions were negligent. Effective immediately, you are dismissed from your position at this hospital." For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. This was a nightmare. "You can't do this," I finally managed to say. "I've been with this hospital for 10 years. My record is spotless." Dr. Reynolds sighed. "Joseph, it's not an easy decision, but the board must ensure the highest standards of care. We've already informed the medical board, and an official investigation will follow." My mind raced, grasping for any way to defend myself. "Please, give me a chance to prove my innocence." "Let me see the evidence you're talking about." Mr. Jennings shook his head. "I'm afraid the decision is final. Security will escort you out." As I gathered my things, my thoughts were a chaotic mix of disbelief and rage. How could they do this to me? My colleagues avoided my gaze as I left the conference room, flanked by 2 security guards. I felt like a criminal, not a doctor who had dedicated his life to helping others. In the hallway, I saw Lisa, a nurse who had worked with me for years. Her eyes were filled with sympathy and confusion. "Joseph, what's going on?" "I've been dismissed," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "They say I was negligent in Mrs. Thompson's case." "That's ridiculous," she replied, shaking her head. "You did everything you could for her. Everyone knows that." "Apparently not everyone," I muttered bitterly. "I'll fight this, Lisa. I have to clear my name." She nodded, her expression determined. "And I'll help you. This isn't right, and we both know it." As I walked out of the hospital, the weight of injustice pressed heavily on my shoulders. I had to find a way to uncover the truth and restore my reputation. Little did I know, the journey I was about to embark on would change my life forever. The streets were unusually quiet as I wandered aimlessly, lost in my thoughts. The weight of my dismissal pressed heavily on me, and the crisp evening air did little to lift my spirits. I had spent the entire day replaying the events that led to my downfall, questioning every decision, every action. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and anger. How could this have happened? Where had I gone wrong? I found myself drawn to the quieter parts of town, away from the bustling city center and the prying eyes of colleagues who might recognize me. The rhythmic sound of my footsteps on the pavement was almost therapeutic, a small comfort in the chaos my life had become. As I rounded a corner near a small cafe, I heard voices. At first, I paid them no mind, but something about the tone of the conversation caught my attention. Two people, a man and a woman, stood just outside the cafe, deep in discussion. Instinctively, I slowed my pace and moved closer, staying within the shadows. "Look, we can't afford any loose ends," the man said, his voice low but urgent. "The hospital board did exactly what they were supposed to. Williams is out, and that's that." I froze, my heart pounding. They were talking about me. The woman glanced around nervously. "I know, but people are starting to ask questions. What if someone digs deeper?" The man shook his head. "They won't. We've covered our tracks. As long as no one knows about the real reason behind his dismissal, we're safe." My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. The real reason? What were they talking about? Still, the woman continued, the pharmaceutical company's involvement was risky. If anyone finds out. "They won't," the man interrupted sharply. "We've paid off the right people. Williams was a threat to their new drug approval, and now he's out of the picture." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This was bigger than I had imagined. My dismissal wasn't just about Mrs. Thompson's case. It was part of a larger conspiracy involving the hospital and a pharmaceutical company. They had orchestrated my downfall to silence me, to prevent me from uncovering something they wanted to keep hidden. I stayed hidden in the shadows, listening intently. The woman seemed unconvinced. "What about the data Williams collected?" "He was thorough. If he kept any records." The man sighed. "If he did, we need to find them and destroy them. But until then, we stick to the plan. No one suspects a thing." As the two walked away, their conversation faded into the night. I remained frozen in place, processing what I had just overheard. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. This was my chance to clear my name, but I needed proof. I needed to find the records they were so afraid of. Determined, I turned and headed back towards my apartment. The sense of purpose gave me a newfound energy. I had to act quickly and carefully. There was no room for mistakes. As I neared my apartment, I saw Lisa waiting outside. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Joseph, I was worried. You disappeared after the meeting." I needed to clear my head. I replied, trying to mask my anxiety. But something happened. I overheard a conversation that changes everything. She looked at me, concern etched on her face. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath and told her about the conversation outside the cafe. As I spoke, her eyes widened in shock and anger. "This is unbelievable," she said when I finished. "We need to find those records. If we can prove what they're doing, we can expose them and clear your name." "I know," I agreed. "But we have to be careful. They're watching us." Lisa nodded, her expression determined. "We'll figure it out, Joseph. You're not alone in this." As I unlocked the door to my apartment, I felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since my dismissal, I felt like I had a fighting chance. The road ahead would be dangerous, but with Lisa by my side, I knew we could uncover the truth and bring those responsible to justice. The days following my chance encounter were a blur of clandestine meetings and late-night research sessions. Lisa and I spent hours poring over patient records, financial documents, and anything else we could find that might connect the dots. It was exhausting and often frustrating work, but the drive to clear my name kept us going. One evening, as I sat hunched over my laptop in my dimly lit apartment, Lisa burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "Joseph, you need to see this," she said, waving a stack of papers. I looked up, my eyes bleary from hours of staring at the screen. "What is it?" She handed me the papers and sat down beside me. I managed to get a look at some of the older records from the hospital archives. These documents show a pattern of unusual financial transactions between the hospital and a pharmaceutical company called Meditex. My heart raced as I scanned the documents. Meditex? That's the company those people were talking about. Exactly, Lisa confirmed. It looks like they've been funneling money into the hospital under the guise of research grants. But if you look closer, the amounts don't add up, and the research projects they're funding don't seem to exist. "This is it," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "This is the proof we need. But we need more. We need to find the connection to my case." Lisa nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. We need to find out why they targeted you specifically." As we continued to dig deeper, we uncovered more inconsistencies. We found patient records that had been altered, treatments that had been changed without documentation, and an alarming number of cases where patients had been prescribed experimental drugs without their knowledge. It was clear that Meditex was using the hospital as a testing ground for their new medications, and anyone who stood in their way was silenced. One night, as we sat amidst piles of documents, Lisa looked at me with a mix of determination and fear. "Joseph, I think I found the connection to your case." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What did you find?" "Mrs. Thompson," she began, her voice steady. "She was one of the patients who was given an experimental drug from Meditex. You didn't know it because it wasn't in her official records. But I found a note in one of the financial documents that listed her as a recipient of the trial medication. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. So they used her as a guinea pig and then blamed me when things went wrong." "Yes," Lisa said softly. "And they knew you would figure it out. That's why they had to get rid of you." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Mrs. Thompson's death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a direct result of Meditex's greed and the hospital's complicity. And they had destroyed my career to cover it up. "We have to go public with this," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "People need to know what's going on." Lisa nodded. "We will. But we need to be careful. If they find out what we know, they'll try to stop us." I clenched my fists, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Let them try. We have the truth on our side. Over the next few days, we meticulously organized our evidence, creating a dossier that detailed every shady transaction, every altered record, and every unethical decision. We contacted a journalist named Sarah, who had a reputation for exposing corruption in the medical industry. When we met her in a small cafe, I felt a sense of déjà vu, remembering the conversation I had overheard that had started this whole journey. Sarah listened intently as we laid out our findings. Her eyes widened in disbelief as we detailed the extent of the corruption. "This is incredible," she said, shaking her head. "If what you're saying is true, this could be one of the biggest scandals in the medical field." "It is true," I said firmly. "We have the evidence to prove it." Sarah looked at us, her expression serious. "You realize the risks involved. If this goes public, Meditex and the hospital will do everything in their power to discredit you." "We know," Lisa replied, "but we can't let them get away with this. Too many lives are at stake." Sarah nodded. "All right, I'll take the story, but we need to be thorough. I want to go over every piece of evidence with you, and we need to protect ourselves. This is going to be a fight." As we left the cafe, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. We were about to take on a powerful corporation and a corrupt hospital board, but we had the truth on our side. And with Sarah's help, we had a fighting chance to expose the injustice and reclaim my life. For the first time since my dismissal, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but I was ready to face whatever came my way. The fight for justice had just begun, and I was determined to see it through to the end. The weight of our discovery settled heavily on my shoulders, but it also fueled a newfound determination. With Sarah on board, we now had a clear path forward. Our mission was to gather irrefutable evidence and present it to the public in a way that couldn't be ignored. But we needed a strategy, one that would protect us and ensure our message was heard. Lisa and I met Sarah in her office, a small space cluttered with stacks of papers and a whiteboard filled with scribbles and notes. She had already begun organizing our findings, and her efficiency was both reassuring and intimidating. "Okay," Sarah began, gesturing to the whiteboard. "Here's what we need to do. First, we need to secure all our evidence. Digital copies, physical copies, everything. We can't afford to lose any of it." I nodded. "I've already started making backups, but I'll make sure to triple-check everything." "Good," Sarah said, then turned to Lisa. "Lisa, I need you to reach out to any colleagues who might be willing to speak off the record. We need testimonies that support our claims." Lisa looked determined. "I can think of a few people who might help. I'll start contacting them today." As Sarah outlined the plan, I felt a mix of apprehension and hope. This was it, the beginning of our fight for justice. "Next," Sarah continued, "we need to build a timeline of events. We need to show the connection between Meditex's financial transactions and the hospital's actions. Joseph, you and I will work on that." "Understood," I replied, glancing at the documents spread out before us. "We have enough data to start making those connections." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "And finally, we need a secure way to release this information. Once we go public, Meditex and the hospital will do everything they can to discredit us. We need to control the narrative." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "What do you suggest?" Sarah smiled. "I have a contact at a major news outlet. They're known for investigative journalism and won't shy away from a fight. But we need to make sure we present everything clearly and concisely. No room for doubt." I took a deep breath. It's a good plan, but we need to be prepared for the fallout. Meditex is powerful, and they won't go down without a fight. Sarah nodded. "That's why we need to be meticulous. Every detail matters. We'll start by going through each piece of evidence and building our case." Over the next few days, Lisa, Sarah, and I worked tirelessly. We spent hours cross-referencing documents, creating detailed timelines, and reaching out to potential allies within the hospital. The more we dug, the more corruption we uncovered. It was staggering how deep the rot went. One evening, as we sat around Sarah's office, surrounded by piles of papers, Lisa looked at me with a determined glint in her eye. "Joseph," I spoke to Dr. Peddle. "He's willing to talk. He mentioned that he saw discrepancies in the patient records too, but he was too afraid to say anything." I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "That's great news, Lisa. His testimony will be crucial." Sarah added his name to our growing list of potential witnesses. We need to gather as many testimonies as we can. The more people we have on our side, the stronger our case will be. As the days turned into weeks, our dossier grew thicker. We had testimonies, financial records, altered patient charts, and evidence of experimental drug trials conducted without patient consent. Each piece of evidence brought us closer to exposing the truth. One night, as we were wrapping up another long session, Sarah looked at us with a mix of exhaustion and pride. "We're almost there. Just a few more pieces, and we'll be ready to go public." I nodded, feeling the weight of the journey we had undertaken. "It's been a long road, but we're getting closer. Thank you both for standing by me through this." Lisa smiled warmly. "We believe in you, Joseph, and we believe in justice. We're not just doing this for you. We're doing it for all the patients who were wronged." The final piece of our plan fell into place when Sarah's contact at the news outlet agreed to run the story. They were intrigued by the evidence we had gathered and promised to give it the coverage it deserved. It was the breakthrough we needed. As we prepared for the big reveal, I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. This was it, the culmination of our efforts. The moment that would determine whether we succeeded in exposing the corruption or were crushed by the forces against us. On the eve of the publication, we gathered in Sarah's office one last time. The air was thick with tension, but also a sense of camaraderie. We had come a long way together, and now we were ready to face whatever came next. Sarah looked at us, her eyes filled with resolve. Tomorrow, everything changes. No matter what happens, remember that we did this for the right reasons. Lisa and I nodded in agreement. For justice, I said, feeling the weight of the words. For truth, Lisa added, her voice steady. And for all those who can't fight for themselves, Sarah finished. As we left Sarah's office that night, I felt a sense of peace. We had done everything we could to prepare. Now, it was time to let the truth speak for itself. The fight was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came next. With Lisa and Sarah by my side, I knew we had a fighting chance. With our plan in place, the next critical step was to gather allies who could support our cause and add credibility to our evidence. We knew we couldn't fight this battle alone. We needed the voices of those who had witnessed the corruption firsthand. Lisa and I started by reaching out to colleagues within the hospital, those who we believed were honest and might be willing to risk their careers to help us. One of our first stops was Dr. Patel, a seasoned physician known for his integrity. We met him at a quiet cafe near the hospital, away from prying eyes. Dr. Patel leaned in, his eyes filled with concern. Joseph, I've heard whispers about your situation. What exactly is going on? I glanced at Lisa before speaking. It's a long story, Dr. Patel. But to put it simply, I was dismissed because I stood in the way of a pharmaceutical company's agenda. They were using our hospital for unethical drug trials. He frowned, his expression turning serious. I suspected something was off. I've seen patient records that didn't make sense, treatments that weren't standard. Lisa nodded. We found evidence that Meditex was behind it. They altered records and used patients like Mrs. Thompson without their consent. We need your help to expose them. Dr. Patel sighed, rubbing his temples. This is dangerous, Joseph. Meditex is powerful. They won't go down without a fight. I know, I replied, my voice steady. But we have to do something. Will you help us? After a long pause, he nodded. Yes, I'll help. I can't stand by and let this happen. With Dr. Patel on board, we gained a significant ally. His reputation within the hospital was impeccable, and his testimony would be invaluable. Encouraged by this success, Lisa and I continued to reach out to others. Next, we approached Emily, a nurse who had worked closely with me. She was known for her dedication to patient care and her outspoken nature. We met her in a park, hoping the open space would provide some privacy. Emily, we need to talk, Lisa said as we sat down on a bench. Emily looked at us, her brow furrowed. What's going on? I've heard rumors about you, Joseph. Is it true you were dismissed? I nodded. Yes, it's true, but it's not because of negligence. Meditex orchestrated it to cover up their illegal drug trials. Her eyes widened. I knew something was wrong. I saw patients receiving treatments that didn't match their conditions. I even reported it, but nothing was done. We need your help, Emily, Lisa said gently. We're gathering evidence to expose them, but we need more testimonies. Will you stand with us? Emily took a deep breath, then nodded. I'm in. This needs to stop. Our patients deserve better. Our next stop was Dr. Angela Harper, an experienced and well-respected pediatrician. Angela had always been vocal about ethical medical practices, and we hoped she would lend her voice to our cause. We met her in her office after hours, ensuring no one else was around. Joseph, Lisa, it's good to see you. Angela greeted us warmly. I was surprised to hear about your dismissal, Joseph, what's really going on? I took a deep breath and explained the situation, laying out the evidence we had gathered. Angela listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each passing minute. Unbelievable, she said finally. I've seen discrepancies too, especially in pediatric cases. Experimental drugs being pushed without proper consent. I had my suspicions, but I never imagined it was this extensive. We need your help, Angela, Lisa said. Your voice could make a huge difference. Angela nodded firmly. You have it. This has to end. As we continued to gather allies, the sense of camaraderie and shared purpose grew stronger. Each new supporter brought us closer to our goal and bolstered our resolve. The risk was immense, but so was the potential impact. One evening, as we reviewed our progress in my apartment, Lisa turned to me with a smile. We're building a real coalition, Joseph. People believe in this cause. I nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. We couldn't do this without them. Each testimony, each piece of evidence, it all matters. We're going to expose the truth. Our efforts culminated in a secret meeting with all our allies. We gathered in a discreet location, a friend's secluded cabin, far from the prying eyes of Meditechs and the hospital administration. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of fear and determination. Dr. Patel spoke first. We're risking our careers and possibly more. But what we're doing is right. We owe it to our patients and to ourselves. Emily added, we need to be prepared for the backlash. Meditechs won't go down without a fight. But if we stick together, we can do this. Angela nodded. We have the evidence, and we have the truth. Now we just need to make sure it gets out. As we formulated our final plan, the unity among us grew stronger. We were not just colleagues. We were allies in a fight against corruption. The stakes were high, but we were ready to face whatever came our way. With our allies gathered and our evidence meticulously organized, we were poised to take the next step. The battle for justice was about to begin, and we were determined to see it through to the end. The morning of the big reveal dawned with a palpable sense of anticipation and dread. We had spent weeks meticulously preparing our evidence and rallying our allies. Today was the day we would present our findings to Sarah's contact at the news outlet and take the first step in exposing the corruption that had turned our lives upside down. Lisa and I arrived at Sarah's office early, our nerves frayed, but our resolve unwavering. Sarah's contact, James, a seasoned investigative journalist with a reputation for taking down powerful figures, was waiting for us. He greeted us with a firm handshake and a reassuring smile. Joseph, Lisa, I've heard a lot about your case from Sarah, James said as he ushered us into a conference room. Let's see what you've got. We spent the next several hours presenting our evidence, piece by piece. Dr. Patel, Emily, and Angela had also joined us, adding their testimonies to the growing mountain of proof. James listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or asking clarifying questions. At one point, James leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. This is a lot to take in, but it's compelling. If what you're saying is true, this could be one of the biggest medical scandals in recent history. Dr. Patel spoke up, his voice steady. It is true. We've seen the corruption firsthand. Patients have suffered and died because of Meditech's greed and the hospital's complicity. Emily nodded, her eyes flashing with anger. We've dedicated our lives to caring for our patients. It's time to hold those responsible accountable. Angela added, we need to make sure this never happens again. Our patients deserve better. James looked at each of us in turn, then nodded decisively. All right. We'll run the story, but we need to be strategic. This isn't just about publishing an article. It's about making sure the truth is heard and acted upon. He turned to Sarah. We'll need to coordinate with our legal team to ensure we're protected from any backlash. And we'll need to gather additional sources to corroborate the story. Sarah nodded. I've already started reaching out to other potential witnesses. We'll also need to prepare for a press conference to present our findings publicly. Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly to finalize our preparations. The tension was almost unbearable, but the support of our allies kept us going. The day of the press conference approached with a mix of excitement and anxiety. On the morning of the press conference, we gathered in a small, dimly lit room behind the stage. The atmosphere was electric with nervous energy. Dr. Patel, Emily, and Angela stood with us, their expressions a blend of determination and fear. Lisa turned to me, her eyes bright with resolve. "This is it, Joseph. We've worked so hard for this moment. No matter what happens, we did the right thing." I nodded, my heart pounding. We did. And now it's time to let the world know. Sarah entered the room, followed by James. "It's time," she said, her voice steady. "The press is ready. Let's do this." We filed onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding us. The room was filled with journalists, cameras, and curious onlookers. Sarah stepped up to the podium, her expression calm and composed. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "We are here to present evidence of a deeply troubling conspiracy involving Meditex Pharmaceuticals and our local hospital. The evidence you are about to see is extensive and irrefutable." One by one, we presented our findings. The room grew increasingly silent as the weight of our evidence sank in. Financial records, altered patient charts, and testimonies from Dr. Patel, Emily, and Angela painted a damning picture of corruption and greed. As I took my turn at the podium, I felt a surge of emotion. I was unjustly dismissed from my position because I stood in the way of this conspiracy. But this isn't about me. It's about the patients who were used as guinea pigs, the lives that were lost, and the truth that was buried. The press conference ended with a barrage of questions from journalists, but James and Sarah expertly managed the crowd, ensuring our message remained clear and focused. As we left the stage, I felt a mix of relief and trepidation. The tipping point had been reached, and there was no turning back. That evening, as we gathered in Sarah's office to watch the news coverage, the reality of what we had done began to sink in. The story was already making headlines, and the public's reaction was swift and furious. Social media was ablaze with outrage, and calls for an investigation were growing louder by the minute. Lisa turned to me, her eyes shining with hope. "We did it, Joseph. We finally did it." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace for the first time in months. "Yes, we did. But the fight isn't over. We need to make sure justice is served." Dr. Patel nodded. "This is just the beginning. But it's a good beginning. We've taken the first step towards holding those responsible accountable." As we watched the news reports, the enormity of what we had accomplished began to sink in. We had exposed a powerful conspiracy and taken a stand for justice. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but we were ready to face whatever came our way. With our allies by our side and the truth on our side, we had reached the tipping point. Now, it was time to see it through to the end. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind of media attention, public outrage, and legal maneuvers. Meditex and the hospital board went on the defensive, denying all allegations and attempting to discredit us. But the evidence we had presented was too compelling to ignore. The authorities launched an investigation, and the pressure on Meditex began to mount. Despite the mounting pressure, we knew the fight wasn't over. Meditex and the hospital board had deep pockets and powerful connections. We needed to confront them directly and force them to answer for their actions. It was time for the final confrontation. One evening, as we gathered in Sarah's office to strategize, her phone rang. She answered it, her expression turning serious. "It's James. He's got news," she said, putting the call on speaker. James's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "I've got a lead. Meditex executives are holding a closed-door meeting tomorrow night at their headquarters. It's a strategy session to figure out their next move." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "We need to be there. We need to hear what they're planning." Lisa nodded. But how? We can't just walk in there. James's voice was firm. I've arranged for a contact inside the building. He can get you access to the meeting room. But it's risky. If you're caught, it could jeopardize everything. I looked at Lisa and Dr. Patel, who had joined us for the meeting. It's a risk we have to take. We need to know what they're planning and gather more evidence if we can. Dr. Patel nodded, his expression resolute. I'm with you. We need to see this through. The next night, Lisa, Dr. Patel, and I arrived at the Meditech's headquarters under the cover of darkness. Our contact, an 8 specialist who was sympathetic to our cause, met us at a side entrance and led us through a maze of corridors to a small room adjacent to the boardroom. You'll be able to hear everything from here, our contact whispered. But stay hidden. If they find you, I can't help you. We nodded our thanks and settled in, straining to hear the voices coming from the next room. The meeting was already in progress. We recognized the voices of several high-ranking Meditech's executives, including the CEO, Robert Larkins. We need to discredit these allegations immediately, Larkins was saying. Our stock is plummeting, and the board is furious. We need a scapegoat. A murmur of agreement followed, and another voice spoke up. What about Joseph? He's already been dismissed. We can frame him further, make it look like he was the one behind the unauthorized drug trials. My blood ran cold. They were willing to destroy my life completely to save themselves. Dr. Peddle clenched his fists, his voice a low whisper. They can't get away with this. Lisa placed a reassuring hand on his arm. We'll make sure they don't. As the meeting continued, the executives discussed ways to manipulate public opinion and obstruct the investigation. It was clear they were willing to go to any lengths to protect their interests. Suddenly, the door to our hiding place creaked open, and we froze. Our contact slipped in, his face pale. You need to get out now. Security is making rounds, and they'll find you if you don't move. We quickly gathered our things and followed him through a series of back corridors, narrowly avoiding a security patrol. As we slipped out of the building, I felt a surge of relief mixed with anger. We had heard enough to know their plans, but we needed to act fast. Back at Sarah's office, we relayed everything we had heard to her and James. We need to release this information immediately, James said, his voice urgent. The public needs to know what Meditech is planning. Sarah nodded. I'll contact our legal team to ensure we're covered. We need to make sure this is airtight. The next morning, a new wave of headlines hit the news. The public outrage grew as the details of Meditech's strategy session were revealed. Pressure mounted on the authorities to take decisive action. A week later, we received word that the authorities had issued warrants for the arrest of several Meditech's executives, including Robert Larkins. The hospital board was also being investigated for their complicity. That evening, we gathered once more in Sarah's office, the tension finally giving way to a sense of accomplishment. We did it, I said, a mixture of relief and exhaustion in my voice. We finally did it. Dr. Patel smiled. It's not over yet, but we've made a huge step forward. Lisa nodded, her eyes shining with hope. We've shown that the truth can prevail. Now we just need to see this through to the end. Sarah raised a glass of sparkling water. To justice, to truth, and to all the lives we've fought to protect. We clinked glasses, the sense of camaraderie and shared purpose stronger than ever. The battle had been long and arduous, but we had reached the tipping point. Now, with the final confrontation behind us, we were ready to see justice served. As we left Sarah's office that night, I felt a sense of peace. The fight was far from over, but with the support of my friends and allies, I knew we could face whatever came next. The truth had come to light, and we were ready to ensure that justice would prevail.